Hello, in this section we're going to have a look at the structure of the new National Curriculum for Wales. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a diagrammatic representation of the first part of the framework, and then show you a framework which is currently being looked at by the AOLE groups in terms of making their minds up about how we get a common design around the framework. It's important, we feel, as groups, that there is a common design, because that will help practitioners when they come in to look at cross-curricular planning and so on. So let's have a look at the structure. So let's have a look at the slide here. What you can see is in this diagrammatic representation, what we start with is, or our starting point when we first worked as groups within the AOLEs, was to think about how the area of learning experience supports the four purposes of a new curriculum. Rather than thinking about what things we currently teach within subject areas and why they were important, we actually started by saying, well, actually, the AOLEs need to service the four purposes. They need to make sure that young people have the opportunity to fulfill those four purposes in their career through school. So let's have a look in terms of the areas of learning experience at the things that we think matter, which interestingly brings us on then to the second box, the what matters approach and the supporting rationale. So the what matters approach was born out of two things really. First, Wynne Harlan's Big Ideas in Science framework, where she basically looks at what she calls the big ideas of science, which is a framework for organising science, which actually seeks to bring together what might be otherwise seen as quite fragmented and atomistic ideas and puts them under an umbrella that should make them more understandable for young people when they learn about science. And the second thing then was a paper commissioned by Barbara Wintersgill around the big ideas in RE, when she starts to frame what the sort of 8 criteria that we should use when developing our what matters statements. So the what matters statements were developed by each group. They vary in number across the AOLEs, from around about 5 to, I think there are about 8 or 9 in science at the moment, and that may change as the groups do more work around progression frameworks. And then the supporting rationales, and basically the rationales explain why those statements are important. And some of the groups are also using the rationale as an opportunity to highlight some key trigger points, which are then picked up within the third section here, which is the progression framework. And the role of the progression framework within the new curriculum is to identify what knowledge, skills, competencies are important within the disciplinary areas, but also to link in the cross-curricular responsibilities of literacy, numeracy, and digital competence. That work is the work that is currently ongoing. The draft frameworks need to be completed in time for the curriculum assessment panel to have a look at them in April. And then you as professional learning pioneers will be testing these frameworks from the point of view of the different what matters statements within schools, because obviously what we need to do is to look at what challenges that presents, what works within the design, what perhaps is more challenging about that design, and so on. And then the final part of the framework, if you like, would be the achievement outcomes, but those have yet to be developed, and that will be the last part of the framework to be developed, which will happen in the summer term. Just this point down here that I've made: logical sequence of engagement for practitioners in a process curriculum. So a curriculum that starts with purposes in mind, okay, what we want our young people to become and to be at the end, rather than starting from the point of view of some objectives to be achieved, would be to work from 1 to 4. As Claire Cinema here points out, many professionals tend to over-assimilate when engaging with new policy. What I mean there is that sometimes they'll look for what's familiar and think that their practice doesn't have to change because they identify enough of the framework to remain within the same sort of series of professional behaviours. But as we know with Successful Futures and the new curriculum that's emerging, what we need to do is to start with thinking about how we achieve the four purposes, and the key thing about the E of the AOLE, those rich and authentic learning experiences. So the question I've posed here is, how can we avoid this over-assimilation, which Claire Simmer points to in her paper, in the development of the new curriculum for Wales? Is there something in the way that we design the curriculum? So when we show people the curriculum documentation or the digital version of the curriculum, is there something we can design into that framework to help them to understand the new structure? Obviously, that'll be part of the professional learning requirements as well for our practitioners. And the question I've posed there is, how can we use digital technology to support us? So my suggestion now would be to spend sort of some time thinking about those questions with Deb.